Okay, hello guys, and welcome back to this next bit of the tutorial. So, last time that you were working on this Pokeball, you should have unwrapped your main Pokeball. So if I open the UV editor, it should look something like this. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but you should have your Pokeball sphere split into 4 sections, and then you should have also your middle band, which is going to be textured black there as well. We also should have your cylinder for your button. If you've worked on your Pokeball this way, that should also be unwrapped. So we did one video when we did it like this, and then I also went ahead and unwrapped the other cylinder off camera, and got it like this. So if you can get both of your buttons to fill as much space as this one here, that would be the best use of the space available to you. So we've unwrapped this now, and now we need to go into Photoshop, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be painting on a square like this one, to make sure we can get our texture across over here so it appears on our 3D model. Now for this one here, we know the button's going to be a white colour, so it's very easy to paint on this square, just to add a white colour right there, that's no problem. But when it comes to texturing this Pokeball sphere here, that might be a bit challenging. We've got some parts that should be red, some parts that should be white, some parts that should be black, and it can be quite inefficient and time consuming just to guess where our UV islands are placed within the square. So what a good practice is rendering a UVW template, which will give us like a snapshot of this setup that we've got, so that we can take into Photoshop and use as kind of like a stencil or an outline for us to colour in and texture our model. A good example for this is if you've ever seen any of Dota's texture maps, this is kind of what they look like, where they've unwrapped maybe a character, and then they've been able to take that into wherever they're texturing, most likely Photoshop, and paint in those textures. So this is the detail you can go to with this way of unwrapping and then texturing. Obviously that's dependent on your Photoshop skills and your ability to paint these details in. Later in the year we will look at Substance Painter, which with Substance Painter you won't have to worry so much about where your UVs are placed, but when you're using Photoshop or doing hand painted things, it is good practice to really consider how you place your UVs and think about how you're going to be able to texture them without guessing where your UV islands are. So without further ado, what we'll do is we will come to here, your UV editor. To render a UV template, you need to click on Tools, then you need to click on Render UVW Template, and for this we're going to just keep it at 1K, so 1024, that's translated as a 1K texture. All the textures go up in powers of 2, so if you've heard of a 2K texture or 4K or 8K, it would be the power of 2 that is closest to that number. So we're going to go with a 1K texture. We are going to leave everything else the same. We do want the visible edges, we do want these to be green so they can be seen very easily, and then we want to choose where we're going to save it. So I'm just going to throw mine here, Pokeball UVW template, and then I'm going to save it as a PNG. now that's saved, brilliant. For the other buttons, you can go here, open the UV editor again, just tools, not relax but render UVW template, and for these, they're smaller buttons. If they had any detail on them, they wouldn't need as big as a texture map as the whole Pokéball. So we're going to put this down to a lower power of 2, my bad, which is 512. So half of 1024, 512 by 512. We will choose where we want this to go. We will call it Pokéball button 1, PNG, and we will save. Okay, and then render the UVW template. So once you've rendered it, it should be alright. Do the same thing for the third button, and then we'll be ready to go in Photoshop. So one thing I didn't show you, after you've filled this out and you have rendered your UVW template, it should pop up with a preview, which you can see. This is what it's going to look like in Photoshop, and we can use this as a guide to paint our texture in. Okay, so I'll close that down now, close this, and off we go to Photoshop. So when we get here, what we want to do is we don't want to click new file because we've made our templates already. What we'd like to do is we want to press open, and we want to find the file on our computer. So I'm going to go and see if I can find it somewhere in here. There's the Pokéball UV template PNG, and there's the first button there. So if we open it up now, it's you're probably looking at this and thinking this doesn't look anything like the template we had. Now we saved it as a PNG, so this allows us to see everything that was white or green, but anything that was black is gone completely. Now this is beneficial to us because what we can do, just going to get rid of this pop-up, is we can paint underneath it, and it can be layered on top of what we paint. So this can be very helpful with our placement going forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer. I'm going to click and drag that layer below the template layer. So just in case you didn't know how to use Photoshop, your option to add a layer is down here in the bottom. This area here is where you can edit or handle your layers. On this side you have many options that you can go through. If you hover over them, they give you a little bit of a breakdown of what they do, and there's some videos attached to that. And then up here is your color palette. So those are the things really we'll be using for this part of the tutorial. So click down here on this small square with the plus sign, adds a layer, and then click and drag that layer underneath. So if you haven't named your layers, it should be layer 1's at the top and layer 2 is underneath. And this is the first layer that we're going to start painting on. Now it would be nice to be able to clearly see the background. So what I will do is I'm going to get my paint bucket tool, and with not a black colour but a darkish colour so we can see our outlines very clearly, I'm going to fill this layer. So I'm just going to click anywhere on this screen and that will fill it, and this is probably starting to look a little bit more like what we saw in 3ds Max. So now that we've got this layer here, we can see clearly how we are working. So if we add another layer on top of layer 2, this will be layer 3. Now we can start to paint in our texture. Now it's always recommended that you have reference from for your colors, for your textures. Don't just try and eyeball it and guess. So in that case, I'd like you to go to Google Chrome and let's search for Pokéball. Many images will come up. Any of these will do. I'm just going to use this image here. I'm going to copy the image. I'm going to come back to Photoshop, and then I'm going to click File, and I'm going to click New, and then you can see that our image is attached to our clipboard. Photoshop recognizes that, so we can just create the clipboard size document, and then we can press Control V. So now that we've done this, we can pick colors from this. It will register to our color palette, and then we can flick back to our UV template and paint those colors in. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to get my red color. So this here is called the eyedropper tool. This allows us to pick any color on the image, like so. So I'm going to pick that color up there, and then I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to get my brush tool, which is here, and using a brush, probably a hard brush, so you can click on your brush settings up here. This is where you can change the size. Now there is a shortcut to change the size, and it's the square bracket keys on your keyboard, so that will change the size without you having to go up there. But because I want to change the hardness, I'm going to come up here and pull this hardness straight along. So that way when we paint, it will have a sharp edge, and we won't have to worry about that leaking over the edge. That being said, as long as it doesn't cross into any of the UV islands that are different colors, feel free to go over the edge. It doesn't matter too much, which is really helpful when you're using a mouse. So hopefully you've positioned your UV islands well. Hopefully you've put your the red part of your Pokéball at the top, so that's easy enough to remember, and hopefully you've put the white part of your Pokéball at the bottom. So you just want to fill these UV islands in. Be careful not to go onto the black part that's supposed to be in the middle, so being very careful there. If you want to have more control over your texture, I recommend you add a new layer for each color that you're going to paint in. Go back to your reference, get your eyedropper tool, pick the color, and then come back to your texture UV template. Get your brush again, and then you can start to paint that in. If you don't like the colors of your reference, just get another one. As long as you're always picking your colors from some kind of reference, you never ever want to just eyeball it and guess. So get that in there. So by the time I've done this, I might end up actually making that black or dark grey a lot darker. Collect my white colour from here, and then we're going to paint this in on a new layer as well. Obviously it's good practice to name your layers as well, so I recommend you do that. I'm not doing it here for the sake of being quick, but if you want to take care of your work, and if you want people to be able to understand your work when they look at it, name your layers. Okay, so almost done here. That's done. Yep. So once you've done this, what you want to do is we want to save our file. So we want to go to File and Save As. Save it somewhere sensible. Probably call it Pokéball Texture instead of UVW Template. So Texture, and then save that saved it as a PSD file, that should be fine. If there's any issues that creep up, then you can save it as a JPEG or a PNG file, which will either be in this video, or you can pull me aside in class and I can show you how to do that. So you want to do this for this file here. You also want to do the same thing for your buttons as well. So I'll show you that very quickly. So if we go and open one of our Pokéball buttons, it should look something like this. Now we know that this whole button is going to be white. So we can go and grab our color. We can come back to the Pokéball button. We can add a layer, make sure it's underneath, and we can fill that in. Once you're happy with the position of your colors, make sure you turn off your UV template guide, and turn off any background as well, and then save over it. Do the same for your Pokéball button. Turn off the UV template guide and save. Yes, so we haven't saved this one yet. Pokéball button 1 texture. Once you've done that, that will be ready to go back into Max. So do that for these two, and do it for your third button as well. And then I'll see you over in 3ds Max. Okay, so hello everybody. Hopefully this will be the last little bit to sort out your Pokéball. So now we're back in 3ds Max, and what we're going to do is we're going to add the texture that you just made in Photoshop to your unwrapped model. So once we're in here, what I'd like you to do is press M on the keyboard. Now yours will most likely pop up like this, and this is called the Slate Material Editor. It's the material editor, and unless you're familiar with how nodes work, which you might get a bit familiar with in Unreal Engine, this can be quite confusing. So instead of doing that, click on the modes menu, and it will take you to the compact material editor. You can see a few of my previous Pokéball textures at the top. What we're going to do is we're going to get you to drag your either PSD file or your PNG file onto these materials, and then we can apply these to our model in 3ds Max. So what you want to do is make sure you can get File Explorer open. It might not be pinned to the taskbar, so that might be tricky. If you've got 2 monitors, make use of that. It shouldn't be too much of a problem. Find your texture, either the PSD or the PNG. Now, the benefit to having the PSD file is that when you upload it and you update it in Photoshop, maybe you want to make a change or add more detail, it updates live. So as you're doing that, as soon as you save it, it should update in 3ds Max straight away. Whereas if you use a PNG or a JPEG, you'll have to change that out every single time. So last time I tried this, there was a few bugs, so we'll see how it goes this time. So I'm going to click and drag this file and add that to there. So that's for our button, and then this is our Pokéball texture, and add it to the sphere next to it. It looks a mess. If you're very precious about how your texture looks on the UV islands, then you can tidy that up in Photoshop. So we're going to minimize this, and now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to apply it to our sphere too, and then we're going to take our button material, apply it to our buttons like so. Just a click and drag job, and now our Pokéball is textured the same way as we had it in our reference. So we can get a better look at this if we press F4 and turn off our edge faces, and there you have it. got a very simple, very basic Pokeball. Now, if you want to stretch and challenge yourself, you can think about how you could add extra geometry to this to make it make more sense. Maybe you put a hinge at the back, or maybe you make the split in your black central band a bit more obvious, or you could take it, make it more complex through the texture that you apply. Maybe you do a bit more shading here and there, or you paint some light into your texture. Those are all options that are available to you should you wish to use them. But as long as you've got to this point, and you've used the render file that we've put on canvas for you to capture your Pokeball, then that would be amazing. And what that file will look like, it will look something like this, where there'll be 3 lights available, and then there'll be a box setup, and all you need to do is position your model within that box. And then you can render that. So we can put that in there like that, and there we have it. We can then go into our rendering setup. So rendering, we can go to render setup, F9 is the shortcut. Make sure this is set on Arnold, make sure it's got the right perspective, and then you can just press render, and that should begin to render your Pokeball with the lighting setup that we've got. There you have it. So I hope to see some really nice Pokeballs, and see you in the next tutorial.